Warning, this is not a podcast for those who have got it together. We are men seeking answers to the questions that have plagued our mind. Can we be undefeated?
Thank you guys for tuning in to our podcast, Positively Undefeated. I also want to point you guys to our website, which is evenoneless.com. You can also connect to us on Facebook and
I'll see you later.
But if you go to our, for our podcast, if you will go and review and subscribe, and those things really help us. So, and I'm here with my aunt, Debbie.
Hello.
Debbie Cifuentes. So thank you so much, Aunt Debbie, for taking the time to talk to me. This isn't your first time to come talk to me.
No. And, I think some people may think that that's where our story actually started with your and my relationship. I've had a few people that listen to the podcast that kind of didn't connect with the fact that you're my nephew. Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming everyone on the board knows that you and I are related.
Right.
But some people have asked, was it just specific to Daryl's death? And we don't really mention a lot of it we don't mention it all in our board meetings because that's a business conversation. So it's really not an appropriate place to say that. But, I've been active in your life. You've been active in mine since you were born. Mm-hmm. You may not even know this, but your mom had gotten sick not long after your delivery. So it was during the summer. I was out of school. I had babysat for 2 or 3 years, including newborns. So for 2 weeks, I took care of you day and night. And I don't know if you knew that or not. So,
and I knew that.
Yeah, it was a wake up call for me, and I guess that's where my love grew for you as a newborn.
Yeah,
I felt like you were part of me then. So,
yeah. Well, I feel it definitely, obviously feel the same. It's funny. I'd sent you some pictures. I was going through old pictures, and partly it's just because, like, I had a bunch of pictures that's like sitting in a storage box. And then, when grandma died, I got some of her pictures. So it's in the storage box, another one, and then when my mom died, I got pictures in the store, same thing. So I'm like,
yeah,
I decided one night, it was really prompted by Stacy because she was trying to organize stuff. And, I had this idea like that I really want to take old pictures that would just end up in some storage box and frame them and, hang them up at like in an office or in my, like if we do if we're doing the rant stuff, it's like, I want to display those because I remember I haven't found it yet. I know it's there somewhere. So grandma, I had gotten a picture from grandma that was like of her great grandmother and something like this. It was like, she was like, one was a French, like her grandmother was French or something. But
her name was Julie.
Huh? What'd you say?
Her last name was Julie.
Yeah. So I have this picture of her somewhere and I haven't found it yet, but
I remember it.
I think it'd be so amazing to kind of blow it up, frame it nice, and then, and have that as, on the wall, because I think that's part of, your heritage and whatever else. But anyway, as I'm going through these pictures, of course, I send you pictures of you. But what I realize is that I don't like a little bit of that's hard for me to time frame, and the pictures help me to time frame. Because like for whatever reason in my mind, I just like automatically, it's like my point is you don't realize how old you are, and I started to realize, whenever these events are happening, you just don't realize how old you are. So you look at pictures and you say, oh, well, I'm like Cambridge's age, my grandchild, Cortland's daughter. And I'm like, oh, well, must be 3 or 4, so it just kind of helps you put time and perspective,
Yeah. I saw some of those pictures you sent to me. I remember one where I'm all dressed up, and I think it was a formal, but back then we had every Valentine's Day, we had a Valentine's Day at church, and every other year it was where the girls asked the guys. And I had a neighbor across the street that I really, really had a crush on.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept thinking that he would ask me the year before, and he never did. So I ended up asking him one time, and it just did not go well. It was very awkward. He was just a friend. We never, it was just really weird. So that dress brought those thoughts up.
I'm curious, you kind of mentioned this, and maybe that's kind of how we can kind of get into it. But you mentioned like how you brought up, and I'm very intrigued by like how you were brought up. Because of course they're my grandparents, and and I think that like, I think as time goes along, you realize that no parent is perfect, that, it's easy to blame stuff on your parents when you're young, but then when you have kids, you start to realize that you're not perfect either. And, you make mistakes. I think I've told you this before, but I think I would say like for a long time that grandpa was my hero. But the truth is I don't really have tons and tons of memories with him. You know what I mean? I do. And I know he's a good person, but also it's funny because years later, I started to realize I had a lot more memories with my with grandma.
Yeah.
Because I had more time with her. It was,
Yeah.
I want to say I was like 19 or something like that when grandpa passed away. And,
No, you were like 17, maybe 18. I don't remember. He died in 1991. So.
Well, yeah, I just graduated. So yeah, I had to, I graduated in 90 and I was 17, but then I turned 18 pretty quick. So.
Right. Well, yeah, really my story or testimony, whatever you would call it. Some may think that it really started on May 31st, which was the day that Daryl shot himself.
Mm-hmm.
Really it started much earlier than that. You brought up childhood. My childhood was pretty uneventful, for testimony's sake. I know I've heard a lot of dysfunctional families, and, while our family unit was not perfect, my grandmother, your grandmother lived with, your great grandmother lived with us for a long time, growing up. And there seemed like there was a lot of, I can't really explain it, but, it was like she was an outsider in our home.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't make hardly any money or Social Security checks, so she really couldn't afford to live by herself.
Yeah.
So, but she would off and on live with us, and she had a house, and she'd go back to her house, and it really wasn't livable.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, nonetheless, she was a big part of my life. My dad you brought him up. My dad was very strict, mainly about protecting Pam and I.
Yeah.
He didn't want us to wear the style, which at that time, back in junior high and high school, the girls had very short dresses. We were not going to do that. My dad was adamant that our dress would be to our knees.
Mm-hmm.
And if it was a tight fitting skirt, you had to be even longer than that. So when you sat down, your knees would be covered.
Yeah.
And, he wasn't like drill sergeant strict. I mean, he did it in a loving manner. Very active in the church, very active. I don't remember ever not being in church.
Mm-hmm.
My dad, and this, he was treasurer of our church in Hobbs for 18 years or something of that nature. And I can remember those Sundays. I can remember all of that time. And I didn't think of it favorably because it put a lot of stress on our family, I believe. Because the church wasn't really self-sufficient. It was always in seemingly financial woes, needing more money to come in and less money to go out. And so I've always kind of attributed that I would never want to do that job. I would never want. I'm a pianist in our church. I've been active in every role. Well, in 2018, I found myself in that very role. And I have been church treasurer since then. And in October, I gave it up. I stepped down. It was time.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like even one less is going to grow and need more time to devote to it. And so I gave it up. Someone else was willing to take it, and that's a good transition. We completed that transition today. So I think that went well.
Yeah.
But I grew up grateful that my dad was stern, because I think it afforded Pam and I protection we may not have ever had, and especially what, boys were expected to be around us and the respect that they had to show us. And I think also, you always hear women that take over their dad, or they look for a man like their dad. And my dad was a very gentle man, and you remember him like that too. He was very gentle, and he loved with all that was in him. He was very well respected too. Yeah. So I feel like I've got that in Reuben. I think Reuben has a lot of qualities that my dad had that I find admirable. You and I talked about what my story would be, and I kind of put some notes together. I don't want to read them because I feel like it's not natural, but a lot of the followers don't know that my first husband died in 2001 of a heart attack in a truck at a truck stop in Houston. And I won't get into our marriage except to say it wasn't really a healthy marriage. The day of his death, I knew before I got the call he had died. Instinctively, I can't explain it except to say I just knew that he had died. I couldn't get a hold of him. I tried calling him. He never called in to check in. I had even talked to my best friend Debbie throughout that day and told her what kind of funeral he would want. And I think God just was preparing me for that call. So before I got the call, I already knew.
Wow. I don't know that I knew.
Yeah, it was, Debbie could tell you, we talk about it often now. Oh my gosh, she was just in awe that I knew ahead of time. I just knew in my heart things weren't just where they're supposed to be. But I believe that that part of my life, was, I have two wonderful sons because of it. Yes, but I was a widow at 46 years old, and there's not many widows at 46. That's a young age. Yeah. But God wasn't through with me. Daryl and Justin, really stepped up to the plate, and I was very proud of both of them getting into marriages that with women that had their children, and the amount of love that they showed to her children was their wife's children really meant a lot to me. Because a lot of people don't know that my sister Pam was my mother's daughter from another marriage. And then my mother and my dad, Roy, met, and my dad adopted Pam. And I believe he loved Pam as much as he loved me. And to see my sons, doing that to their generation, to their stepchildren, was very, very important for me. So I might stop there and see if you have any questions about that time of my life.
Yeah, I actually, the one thing I don't know if I've asked you this before, so it might be perfect, but I remember my mom, she rarely, she had nothing but positive things to say about, y'all's dad, my grandfather. But I remember her one time saying that she couldn't really explain it really well, but she said that she could just sense sometimes that she wasn't his daughter, In other words, maybe she felt like that she was treated a little bit differently in certain circumstances. But she didn't say it in this bad, she made it clear that he was a good man and that he was a good father. But she says she could sense it every once in a while. And I'm curious if you ever felt that, or your thoughts on that.
I did, actually. I think it was when she became a teenager. She was a little bit of a rebel. She got to a point in time that she argued about the length of our hems on our skirts, and very argumentative, and it really caused some problems. And I can't blame Grandpa for that. I can't blame her for that. She just got very independent, very young. Yeah. And that was the only time I ever sensed a dysfunction value towards their relationship. But I think the older she got, the less she grew out of that, or the less she felt that.
Yeah.
I don't think he treated you any differently when you were born. He loved you. I can remember I've got pictures somewhere in some of my pictures where he was holding you.
Yeah.
And I can remember him holding you. And I remember one time me putting the diaper on and he come in and said, that diaper's not put on right, is it? And I said, yeah, I think so. And what it was is your umbilical cord still had the little clip or whatever they used back then.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was sticking out a little bit. And I don't think he thought that's what that was. It was sticking out. So, anyway, it was, I couldn't explain that. No, Daddy, I don't think that's what you think it is.
Oh.
But he had a really keen sense of humor. And so sometimes he would just really, tell a joke or something that you just couldn't forget.
Yeah.
But he was a good man. We had people calling us when he died, asking if they could be pallbearer.
Yeah.
Usually you try to find a bunch of pallbearers. And I remember Larry commenting that he thought that when he died, we'd have to pay people to be his pallbearers, but we got all these calls, people begging to be his pallbearer. I think that's what people saw, what kind of man he was.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I remember that he was very admirable. The one thing I remember him that still is in my actions and my beliefs is he was a very strong steward. He believed in tithing. If you have a dime, a penny of that belongs to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And he strongly believed in tithing. And thankfully, Reuben and I, Reuben is just as I am. He believes in tithing. And it's not just, you give what God tells you to give. And it may not be 10%, it may be more. But I think at the very least, it should be 10%. And I got that from my dad.
Yeah. I don't know. It's funny because you bring that up. It's because, Grandma and I talked to a lot about that, the tithing thing, and she was very adamant, to me that needed to happen, and I didn't necessarily agree with her, but yet you cannot deny certain things, you cannot deny that, like, if you just look at it from a financial standpoint, I think that, Grandma was taken care of, like, when Grandpa died, she was taken care of for the rest of her life,
Yeah.
Not, people not knowing, they may think, oh, she's extravagant. No, just a normal, she could live a normal life and not have to sit around and worry about money,
Wow.
And that, when you look at that testimony or whatever, then you can't deny it. That
No.
when it comes to just that part of it, it's like, man, and you can take the other side of it. And my mom seemed to struggle with money her whole life. And yet she never, I'm not saying tithing wasn't important to her, but I think that it just wasn't the priority that that maybe, my grandparents thought it was. And
did she ever teach you that when you were young? Did she ever talk about tithing when you were a kid?
I think, like, in my mom's case, it was more lip service is what I felt like, and obviously I love my mom. I don't want to talk negatively, but on the same point, I think it was a lot of lip service. In other words, I think it's the right thing to do, but I don't do it, and
when Reuben and I met, Larry didn't believe in tithing either. There was a couple times throughout our marriage that when I worked, I tithed on what I made. My dad told me one time when we were talking about it, after Larry and I'd married, and I said, he won't let me tithe. And he said, God doesn't want the tithe that is paid, I can't remember exact words about, but essentially just saying that God doesn't want a tithe to cause dysfunction or just, a stress. It should be given from the heart. And God understands if you don't give as a result of someone not letting you give.
Right.
So, but I would try to tithe on my, as I worked, I would try to tithe. And there was a couple times, one in particular, I remember that I had tithed on what I made, and he had lost his job. Oil field had kind of went blah, and uh, it was really a bad time financially for us, but I continued to tithe. And anyway, long story made short, out of the clear blue, we got a check from evidently he invested with the company and really didn't know it.
Mm-hmm.
And I never saw anything in his paychecks or anything that told me anything, but he ended up with a sizable amount of a check. And he called his company to ask him what it was. And he said, well, you were vested in 401. And that's, since you're no longer with the company, well, now you have a choice whether you keep it or not, but evidently back then you didn't.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we got this check out of clear blue, and he kind of understood at that point. He said, yeah, you've been giving your money to the church, haven't you?
Yeah.
So he knew that was from the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately that's the first thing I thought. So when Reuben and I married, Reuben brought the subject up to me. I believe in giving the church money. How do you feel about that? Well, absolutely I do. And so we probably give, we give from our hearts.
Yeah.
So, I met Reuben about a year after Larry died, a little over a year. And those that know Reuben know that, while God is my rock, on which I stand, Reuben is my soulmate. He's my steadfast partner.
Yeah.
He holds me up with a tenderness, and he loves you as my son, from another mother. He loves you just as much as if you were his own nephew.
Right.
That's just how he does. He loves with his heart.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think
I was
just going to say, from the outside looking in, like, man, you can, especially now, you can really see through like everything that's going to happen in the future from that point of y'all meeting, that God absolutely put Reuben in your life,
Yes, he did.
And I mean, I have a hard time explaining or being articulate about it, because like, there's no doubt in my mind that God put purposely Reuben in your life, and he knew what was to come and what was going to happen, and he knew what you needed. And I think it's like one of God's biggest graces probably for you when I look at your life,
Yeah.
But
yeah, he's definitely a big part of my life. I don't think I could have gone through what we've experienced the last 12 years and even years before that, of things that we had to go through and that we went through. I don't think I could have done what I was able to do and get past where I am now if it wasn't for him and his prayer part. He's a praying man. He's praying right now that this conversation we're having now is, going to be touch someone in some way, but he is very special. I want to move past that because everyone knows that. Everyone knows you and I, but I want to move past that to, let's say, right before Justin died. Some know, and we'll kind of start with that. Justin died of suicide in 2011. He was only 30 years old. He had 2 awesome kids and was a stepfather to 3 that he loved so much. And, we don't know why. We don't understand why. We don't hold any ill feelings towards anyone having to do with anything in his life. No one made that choice for him. He made that choice himself.
Yeah.
So, there are some people who say, well, why? Who knows? I mean, I think even if someone left a note, I don't think anyone really could understand what depression does to someone. It could be suddenly onset, and I don't feel anything ill towards anyone that was in his life at the time he died.
Yeah.
I think that we grew to understand suicide a little bit more than what we'd ever done before, because it had never touched our life like it did. Thankfully, very quickly within 2 weeks, we were in family counseling. We had the kids with us. Justin had custody of his children. when he died. So his ex-wife had the kids now, but we were still very, very active in their lives. So we took them to grief counseling with us, and I really think that was the best thing we could have ever done. Mm-hmm. That prepared us even now after Daryl's death. But I think his kids at the time were so young, but we did spend a lot of time with them. It helped us kind of get past it too. A few years after that, in February of 2017, I was diagnosed with invasive cribriform carcinoma, breast cancer. Mm-hmm. I was terrified of what that would mean. I was just, no one likes to hear the C word. No. But Reuben has always kept me prayed up, always had a calm face. You were praying from your end. A lot of people were really praying for us. My best friend, Debbie, I've mentioned her earlier, and I've mentioned her in previous podcasts. She came to every appointment with Reuben to help us remember what was said, because, in the heat of the moment and things that you might miss. But she was able to remember what was said. She took notes. So, I am 6 years cancer-free, and I give God the glory for that, because I believe that's all of Him. Yeah. I'm not saying that, if you pray, you're not going to have cancer. I'm not going to say if you pray, your cancer will be in remission. I'm not going to say if you pray hard enough, your cancer will be gone. It's just the journey you have. I knew a lot of women that had died due to breast cancer. Mm-hmm. So that kind of scared me, just hearing that C word. But today, 6 years later, I'm cancer free.
Awesome. I think that I look back in that time period, and it's like, it just seemed like I from the outside, I just felt like that, man, how much can this woman go through? It's kind of what I was thinking, it's like, it
I thought the same.
Fair, I guess, is the best way to say it. It didn't seem fair. And, you have people like their story is cancer, and then you have people, their story is maybe someone close to them dying. And then you have people that, like one thing really defines their whole life, and yet you'd seem to have multiple things, and it's like, and the story wasn't over. That's the crazy part,
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I just feel like God He wasn't done with me, and He put the right medical team in place to make the decisions we made to help us get through that time. I did have a lumpectomy, and then I had radiation with a implant called a Salvi that was a conduit for radiation. Mm-hmm. And so I did 10 sessions over 15 days. And, to show you what kind of prayer partner Reuben was, when they implanted the implant, it was a surgical outpatient kind of thing. And my doctor let Reuben come in with me when it was done. He and Debbie came in there while I was having it done. And I told Debbie, because the first part was very painful. They're numbing your breast, very wide ranged, basically your whole breast. Mm-hmm. And they're doing with the Novocaine kind of thing. And it was extremely painful. And Debbie sang with me to get past that process. And I could kind of see her. She was standing up, and I could see her. I couldn't see Reuben. Well, he was on his knees praying while that was going on. Mm. And again, that just amazes me, But we got through that. That was another part of our life. We got through it. And then people ask, why in the world would you want to start a nonprofit? Well, back then we never thought about it. It wasn't even a glimmer of an idea at that point. But Memorial Day of 2021 kind of changed our attitude about that. Mm-hmm. I got a phone call from the Winkler County Hospital. It was on my caller ID, and my heart sank. I just knew. I can't even explain. I just knew. He told me that Daryl had shot himself, and that I asked what his condition was, and he said that when he left there, airlifted to the trauma center in Lubbock, that he was alive. But by the time we got to Lubbock, I really didn't think he would be living.
Mm-hmm.
And we kept it together long enough for the conversation with the surgeons telling me that his condition was grave. They attempted surgery, and he was bleeding so profusely they had to stop.
Mm-hmm.
They told me he lost his eyes. So all these things were going in my head, and that we didn't get to see him for 4 hours. I made the call to you, and I was worried about you driving because I know you were pretty upset.
Mm-hmm.
And I was worried about you trying to get to Lubbock at that time. But when you got to Lubbock, a kind of sense of calm came over me. I can't really explain. I think it was because I knew you loved him.
Mm-hmm.
And it just gave a calmness to me for the three of us together to be there. And when the girls arrived, and then Ethan later on, Brianna having to make that decision was a tough time. But that's when we kind of started talking about, while we were in the hospital, you and I and you and Brianna Zoe, our first podcast, y'all kind of touched on this. You and I touched on this. But I feel like that as a mother losing two sons to suicide, I don't think God purposely, I can't explain how my thought process is on this, but not that I believe that the Lord took two sons from me,
Mm-hmm.
but I do believe the life that we've gone through gave me a voice to prevent maybe doing one small thing for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's my goal through Evil and Less, is I don't want mother to have to go through this.
No.
And a family and kids, and their kids to lose their daddy, and that's just devastating for these kids. They're adults now. Ethan's 12.
Mm-hmm.
I really believe that this is going to affect him for the rest of their life.
For sure.
And so it's we just don't want that to happen for anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So we all kind of you took pictures while he was in a hospital bed. We took pictures. And as a family, we decided that seeing this, who would want to die by suicide, commit suicide, if they thought or they saw the family going through this,
Mm-hmm.
the devastation.
Right.
So that's when we decided to start Evil and Less. And I was ready to start it right then. I really was. You and I talked about it, and it's about God's timing. It was not about what Debbie wanted. It wasn't what Burl wanted. Yeah, it took 2 years, but that's because God had it set for 2 years. I think we had to get through the grieving,
Mm-hmm.
the intense grieving, before we could even go down that road.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Yeah, I think there's so much truth to that, because personally, I had to get to that point where I could, and I know now, I didn't understand it completely then, but it's like I had to get to the point of healing myself, before I could really think about, something else. I asked you this on the first podcast, which was really, I think a lot of people look at you and like, how in the world is this woman not bitter? I have people ask me this frequently.
Yeah.
How is she not bitter? How is she not this hateful woman? Because if you're a parent, you absolutely that's the worst thing in the world, losing your kids in your mind, and yet, they look at you and they don't see that bitterness and that just hate, resentment toward God and, and all that. I've had things happen in my life where I got very discouraged with God, so I can understand that. And I realized something lately, and I want to know, and I wanted to ask you if it's true, because what my answer is normally when people say that or ask me about that, I say two things. I say faith. I feel like that, you are a woman of faith, and, I've known that my whole life, and you've portrayed that, and you lived the real deal, I believe. And so that's my one answer. And then my second answer is something we talked about a little bit earlier, which was Reuben. I believe that Reuben had a big impact in your healing, and again, I believe that God
does.
He put Reuben in your life, at the perfect time. And then on top of that, Reuben is, for people that don't know, this is my opinion, but Reuben is like the polar opposite of, Uncle Larry.
Absolutely he was.
To me, he is. And I've told you this before, Daryl and I used to jokingly laugh because Reuben is a very, quiet person. He seems like, and it was us joking, but it was more like Reuben seems like he'll do whatever he wants for you, for whatever you want, he's just like, I'll do whatever. And we kind of laughed about that, but we laughed about it in a real sense that we knew that there's some truth for that in our own lives, so that we needed to be servants more to our wives, or, what I mean? In other words, there's this truth there too, that this is a picture of what a good husband looks like,
Yeah.
But on the same point, it's not what the world will tell you, that, men need to be, never vulnerable and never weak. And you realize that. And so anyway, I tell them that I think Reuben was a big part of that.
He was. He is.
Recently, and this is what I want to ask you about, is basically the idea is that people that are in your situation, they really want to see that other people are grateful for what they have. And what I mean by that, I think that you absolutely, for example, somebody might be scared to show you a picture of their kid because they're afraid that it might bring up bad stuff for you, that you're, but what I've realized in your situation is actually that would be the opposite of the truth. You would actually be really grateful to see a picture of, like, my kids, for example, because I think it shows what you really appreciate is people that are grateful for what they have. And I think that, when I think about, when you see parents that are grateful for their kids, I think that actually is a really good thing for you, because then they might understand the grieving that you went through because you were grateful for your kids, Yeah. And so I feel like that. I don't know if that's completely true, but I think that that part of that amazing, thing that's been done in your life is that you realize what's been lost. And the only way you can realize what's been lost is to see the gratefulness of what you had.
Yeah.
And I think that when you see other people being grateful for what they have, like their kids are alive, their kids are, and they're grateful for it, that makes you happy to see they're grateful.
Yeah, it does. It does. And a lot of people don't want to say the word suicide to me. Tell me a story, or did you hear about so-and-so? They don't want to tell me stories about that because the word suicide.
Yeah.
But, suicide is a way of life. That's what we're trying to do, is get people away from that choice. We're not going to, like you said, we're not going to get them, we're not going to make an impact on every person. You had commented in the first podcast that you're not so naive as to think that you're going to completely take it completely out of the equation. We're not going to be that kind of, we're not going to be able to do that. As hard as, that sounds, we just can't. But like our name, even if one less family, even if one less person, that's our goal.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of people here that I work with that have told me, how do you do it? I can't explain it, because if someone doesn't have a relationship, I can't imagine anyone going through anything like this without having the Lord, having the Lord walk them through it. I just can't imagine. And I know of some that are not believers. One person comes to mind. I don't mention names, but one person comes to mind years ago lost his son to he was skateboarding and a car accident hit him. It killed his son. Mm-hmm. And that man is so bitter, even 15, 20 years later. His son was 12, it was an awful accident. God bless the driver was just devastated. And the driver was actually charged for, they were sober. It was dark. The kid had no business being on the road. I can't remember what the driver was charged for, but they did serve a little bit of time. But it was an accident, and those accidents are going to happen. And you have to think about the driver, sometimes intentionally, if it's an intentional, or they're drinking or they're, somehow, not in the right minds when they're driving or whatever. But, that man is so bitter. A pastor tried to visit with him and he said, "No, I don't want any part of your God." Mm-hmm. And, oh my goodness, that just breaks my heart, because that's someone that's not a believer. And that's someone that, that is walking straight to hell. He's walking a line in that direction. It just breaks my heart. So, don't be afraid to talk to me about these kinds of things. I may not have a resolution, but I certainly can listen. I can, give you my love, my prayers, and my compassion. Those stories do exist.
Why do you think that? And I mean, maybe you went through a little bit of it, but why do you think that you did not grow bitter? And like, another way to say it, I just listened to a friend recently who he lost his job with the church as a youth minister, and it just crushed him. And so that was maybe 10 years ago. And really, he has been just super disappointed with God. And he wouldn't say that. I just pick it up that he's just doesn't want anything to do with church anymore. Doesn't want anything to do with any of that.
Well, I was almost at that point, when I was at that point in the hospital before Daryl's, we disconnected life support during that waiting time of 3, 4, 5 days. I was so angry at God. How in the world can you put me through all of this? I try to serve you. I try to do my best. I'm active in the church. I'm in the choir. I play the piano. There's so much I do for you. When I asked you to take care of my son because I knew he was struggling, why didn't you take care of him? But God gives us so many little things to get us past, or me to get past that. The first thing was, and I've said this before, I was in the chapel at the hospital, and I was by myself, and I was just really just vocal about, why, God, why are you doing this? Or, where is a miracle? We need a miracle now, and then it's the time 9-year-old grandson walks in and sits down beside me, and he says, "So what do we do?" And he was asking me what we do at this point. Yeah. And I'm sure he heard me mouth to God. And of course, I was crying, very, very sobbing uncontrollably. But just to hear that small voice ask, "What do we do?" And to be able to teach a 9-year-old how to pray, God used that instance. God used that time to heal even before Daryl died. Mm. And I can still remember the Holy Spirit just encompassing me. Mm-hmm. And so the next few days, God just, everything in every line, God took care of it. Mm-hmm. No, he didn't give my son back to me, but I will see my son again. Yeah. I will see both of my sons again. Mm-hmm. And I find peace in that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's powerful. And I think that that's part of the reason why we wanted to talk, today, is that I think people need to hear that, because sometimes when you're in the midst of grieving or in the midst of things, life struggles, whatever, you just can't see the forest through the trees. You can't see it, and to hear it from somebody else's mouth and be able to, like you were talking about at that moment before that in the church, you just can't see it. I remember those days and I couldn't see it either. I could not see, any of it. And I think it's just so and I think it's crazy vulnerable to be able to just say, and it's so true. It's like if anybody in this world, I think in the worldview that this wouldn't happen to, it'd be a person like you because of, your faith. And that's just not how it works. It's just not how it works.
Well, bad things happen to good people too, no matter how you want to idolize yourself, I try not to do that. And, and in some ways I'm proud that that's not really the right word. Yeah, I'm proud that I can display, what God's done for us, how God has carried us through this. And I think my cats are fixing to get into a fight. So I think we have to cut this pretty close. They're hissing at one another now.
I want to ask you this. I want to make sure I ask you this. So,
okay.
I mentioned this to you, so I gave you a little warning, but, it's really dawned on me lately. I put something in my notes and you're going to have to forgive what I put in my notes because I don't know. It's like me thinking or, whatever. And I put in my notes that nobody in our family can die next besides you. and what I mean by that is like everybody's younger, nobody, and
I'm first in line is what you're saying.
Well, and, I told you, like, obviously, I hope and pray you have 20 more years, but I want to make sure that, this organization was started because of, what happened. And, us wanting to make a difference, us wanting to show people hope, us wanting to, really we've opened ourselves up. I was telling Stacy this earlier that, by us doing this, we've opened ourselves up. And I heard this term used whenever this term was used, like a vulnerability hangover. So whenever we did our event here in Elk City, and after I got through talking for the next day or two, that's the best way to describe it. I had this vulnerability hangover. And it's where you question everything you said.
I did.
You worry that you said too much. You worry you didn't say enough. And I had it. And what I feel like that God was constantly reminding me of is that he wants us to be vulnerable and he wants us to not hold back. And he wants that's what I believe God was reminding me of. And, I really want to hear from you what you hope the legacy of this organization is, that when you're dead and gone, that what do you hope the legacy, because I believe this is your legacy. I really do believe that. I think that I've been, like, me being a part of it is just a gift. And I'm very thankful for that gift. And I take it seriously. I take it very seriously. But, this isn't going to be my legacy. This is going to be yours. And I'm curious what you hope that legacy looks like.
Well, I feel like when you're talking legacy, I feel like you're talking about someone else because it's hard to imagine myself, being a part of a legacy. But I want it to continue. Yeah. I want, I would think that if it doesn't continue, then we've gone through all this for nothing. Mm-hmm. I want my story to be told over and over, if need be, if. I'm very quick, and maybe Reuben gets a little bit, hesitant about my vocalizing our organization. We meet someone and we get in a conversation, and I don't just blurt out, my story to them, but I'm real quick to tell them, that we started a nonprofit that. I have a card on, and people are so accepting of that. We were at getting our nails done or our pedicures.
Mm-hmm.
And a lady brought up suicide. And I quickly told her, she saw my butterfly tattoos that I got in honor of Justin and Daryl. I don't have tattoos. That's the only one I have. And I will never have another one. That's Daryl and Justin. It represents them. But I want that to continue. I don't want to stop. Oh, well, Debbie died, so I guess we can just go about our merry way. I don't want that. If it takes more of the family to come get involved in it, that's what I want to happen. I want this to continue.
Yeah.
50 years from now, I want even one less to be a very well-known resource to reach out to keep from going through this stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm very proud as president where you've taken this.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate it. I've said it before, and you've been a huge inspiration to me. You're very important in my life, and I couldn't.
Well, you are to me.
How I can't, verbalize like how much you've taught me. And there's this country song that it's like it basically it says that the woman who believed in me. And it's talking about this, whether it's his mother or his wife or whatever, but it's like, you've been a person in my life that's always believed in me. And in so many different aspects. And really whenever, I think this is like, if I could share anything and like hope to pass on anything about that is that even whenever I didn't deserve it, you know what I mean? It's like you saw something that other people didn't see, that I didn't see myself. And that feels, for a long time before Daryl died, before Justin died, before all this, like I felt it then, but I feel it so much more now because, I think that like I needed you, at different times in my life, when my mom passed away and I didn't, I needed that. I needed you and, other times too. And I think that God, in spite of all of it, he like knew what he was doing, whether like the Reuben thing, God putting Reuben in your life at the exact moment you needed it, and I think that I look back on so many different incidences and conversations. And I know that without a doubt, God had you in my life to remind me of stuff, remind me of faith, remind me of him, remind me of like, just, who I am and but the encouragement and all that, it really has meant the world to me. And I can't, like I said, I'm not very good at explaining it, but you get the idea.
I do. You can just say, I love you.
Very much. And I think that, I want it. It's like, it's become more and more. I think, I did Tony Foster's brother, I've known him pretty much my whole life as far as, come through you. And he, I'm doing his brother's funeral, being a part of his brother's funeral. The man's 57 years old and he died. And I'm just so like that really affects you. And you start to think, it's like I'm 51 and, life, I think there's two sides of it. Like if people ask me, I'll say, I'm going to live to be 90, I have 40 more years or whatever. That's what I'll say, because there's a part of me that believes that. Like because I don't want to just give up on time and I want to be able to like continue doing stuff. I want to live. And then on the other part though, I think that God puts those events in your life because it reminds you of how short life is. Life is super short. And
it is.
I think about like how much time I spent with like grandma, but yet it's been how many ever years since she passed away. And it just shows that life is so short, and I think.
Well, I think she died November 10 years ago in 2013.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't, I forget those.
Yeah. 10 years.
But you just you realize that those, like those people in your life are super important, and.
Yes.
And anyway, and one thing that there's some of these funerals you attend, they don't want you to talk. I'm not talking about necessarily this funeral, but I'm saying in general, where they don't want you to talk too much about God because they weren't sure of their beliefs.
Oh, that's sad, isn't it?
It really is. And yet I think about it's like, we're not going to have that discussion, when you die. We're not going to have this discussion about, and nor did we have this discussion really when any in our family die. We're not saying it. And I love that. I love that that's the, you're leaving. I mean, not one of your grandkids, not one, I promise you, is going to be going, well, I wonder if she is a Christian or not. That's not going to be a subject. We're not going to be sitting at a funeral going, I wonder if we should talk about God or not.
Well, you hear people, you hear especially older generations, it'll say, oh, I never did. Oh, I was baptized when I was 10, but I never gone to church. But, it's not about the baptism.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that the baptism in our belief is a testimony of your salvation. It's not your salvation. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people in the older generation, oh, yeah, I was baptized at a Brush Arbor revival. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, you were baptized, but were you saved?
Yeah.
Did you, ask Jesus to be your savior? Mm-hmm. And, a lot of people that aren't saved, they're in for a shock if they've not been saved, if they're just relying on their baptism.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you know what? All said and everything we said, anybody listening to this, even one less, was started with the best intentions. Yeah. We wanted to do this for the exact purpose of giving alternatives to end in your life. If someone's listening to this and they're thinking about suicide, there is so much more. Your life is not over. And I want them to know that in families, get into a good counseling, reach out to your friends, they're waiting for you to reach out to them because of the delicacy of a suicide. Yeah. But all you have to do is reach out to them and say, you know what? I need a hug. Mm-hmm. I need you to pray for me. Anyway, I just wanted to say that in my parting words.
Well, and I'll add on to that. It's like, the best, if you're listening to this and you're feeling those ways, I mean, you have two people right here. There's more than two, but you have two people right here that would be love to hear from you. Would absolutely like you can, you like Debbie, you're one of the most, you're very easy to talk to. So you would be very available. There's no excuse for having somebody to talk to. You would be happy to talk to them, and so would I. And I think that,
But we've said, and we'll say again too, though, we're neither one professionals.
Right.
All we can do is tell you our experiences and tell you why it's important to make a different choice. Mm-hmm. Your family can't be the only reason, but it is a big reason. Yeah. But your life is not over. The disappointment you're going through right now, don't think of a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Mm-hmm. Some of those things will get better.
I keep saying it's a season. I mean, I'm sure you can say the same things. Like, how many seasons did you go through where you were just like very depressed or very upset or very mad? And those seasons go away. So they go away, and they go away a lot quicker than you think, You
do.
And
I've been through a lot. I've been through a lot of instances, not just, with losing my sons, losing my first husband, my breast cancer. I've gone through those seasons too. There's been a lot of times that, I won't even pretend to understand the amount of depression someone has. I've not experienced that depression. Yes, I've been sad. Yes, I've been depressed for a moment or whatever, but not to the level that I know some suffer with. Mm-hmm. And, there's so much available now to help you through that and help someone through that. So
Well, we thank you guys for tuning in. Debbie, thank you so much for taking your time to talk to me, and I appreciate it. And if you guys, again, we want to encourage you guys to go to our website, evenoneLess.com. Follow this podcast. That's a great way at Positively Undefeated. Also through the website, and I know it's a work in progress, but we're trying to make it available where you can contact Debbie and like send her an email and be able to ask questions if you or anything. So we're working on those type of things, but I think it starts with just reaching out. Facebook's a great place to reach out to our organization. And so thank you guys for tuning in. And Debbie, I appreciate you and love you.
All right. Love you. Y'all be sure and watch for our February event that's coming up February 24th.
Yeah, February 24th in Midland. I'm excited about that. So you guys have a great day.
All right.
Love you.
Love you too.
Thank you for listening to Positively Undefeated. If there was something in this show that resonated with you, please share the show with your community. If you want this show delivered each Monday morning to your podcast app of choice, please subscribe or follow. And if you'd like to get a hold of Burl, please do so by going to burlstricker.com/contact.